Welcome back to Crime in Court. We are reading through the Delphi trial transcript, and this is the state's case, part 27, and we are on Lieutenant Jerry Holman with the Indiana State Police. And based on the things that I know about this case, he's a lying liar who lies. So let's dive into his testimony here. And we are starting a new day in court. It is October 26th, 2024. And let's begin. So the court says, all right, we are back on the record in the state of Indiana versus Richard Allen. I'll show the defendants here in person with counsel. States here by the prosecutor and his deputies. All of the jurors have reassembled, and we are we ready to bring back the jury to the courtroom, Mr. McLeland? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rosie, we ready? Yes. Court says, okay, and I believe we talked up here at the bench. We have one witness for the day. Mr. McLeland says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, and the defendant will be providing copies for the jury of the exhibits that we had yesterday. You'll get those copies on Monday, and I think that's fine. That's not a problem. So Mr. McLeland says, Judge, we do have one copy of the exhibit that we admitted yesterday. If we may publish it for the jury before we call the witness. The court says, sure. Mr. McLeland says, in conjunction with whatever the defense needs to publish. Court says, okay, sure, no problem. All right, let's go. The bailiff says, all rise. The jury enters the courtroom. The bailiff says, thank you, you may be seated. The court says, give you a minute to get settled in over there, ladies and gentlemen. All right, well, good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. I hope you had a pleasant evening. Again, as we have parted company and you've had access to your phones and electronics, to contact family and check your work emails, always under the supervision of the bailiffs. I'll just continue to ask you the series of 5 questions that probably in a couple of days you're going to recite back to me because I keep saying them so much. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you read, seen, or heard any media accounts concerning this case? All jurors answer in the negative. Have you discussed this case with anyone? All of them answer in the negative. Have you permitted anyone to discuss this case with you? They all respond in the negative. Court says, have you conducted any research into this case? They all say no. Court says, and has anybody persisted in attempting to discuss this case with you? All of them respond in the negative. The court says, all right, well, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for continuing to honor the court's directions about making a decision on the evidence and not on any outside influences. So we are ready to proceed. Mr. McLeland, Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell says, thank you. Good morning, Your Honor. The court says, good morning. Mr. Luttrell says, we would ask to pass redacted copies of State's Exhibit 279. The court says you may. Mr. Luttrell says, looks like I counted correct, Your Honor. The court says okay. Mr. Rosie says, Judge, as I mentioned, we were having some issues with a copier here in the courthouse. So on Monday, we're going to make copies of the microscopic photos. Court says, oh, okay, thank you. Yes. So we'll have those available for you then on Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. The court says, you're welcome. So this must be a Saturday, I'm assuming. Did it come with a day of the week when we started? No, it just says October 26th, which I'm assuming is a Saturday because if you recall, the jury was sequestered in this case, and because of that, due to time, they wanted to speed the trial up a little, and so they did half days on Saturdays. So that's what I'm thinking this is right here. Okay, so I'm past that. Sorry, I scrolled up to see where we were. Court says you'll have those available to you Monday morning. Mr. Rosie says, thank you. The court says, you're welcome. All right, you may proceed, Mr. McLeland. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, the state of Indiana would call Indiana State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman, please. And so with that, direct examination, as he is sworn in, and then Direct examination of Jerry Holman begins with Mr. McLeland doing the questioning for the state. And just as an FYI, we're only going to get through about half of his testimony. We're going to get through direct and cross, but then redirect and recross, and all the questions are going to be in the next part. So, part 28, just for reference. All right, so Mr. McLellan says, Lieutenant Holman, you've testified here before. I just want to remind you that the microphone doesn't amplify for the people inside the well or in front of the court, so if you could just speak up and use your best outside voice. Fair enough? The witness says yes. Will you state your name, please? Jerry Holman, and he spells his last name. How are you employed? With the Indiana State Police. And what is your rank with the Indiana State Police? I'm a lieutenant. He's high up there. Lieutenant Holman, he's part of that unified command, in case you guys forgot from the Franks memo. He's part of that like group of all the different law enforcement from the different agencies that are involved, from Carroll County, Indiana State Police, all the different um Delphi, all the different agencies that are involved, and there's people that are communicating from those agencies called unified command. He's one of those individuals, and they know much more about this case than they're ever letting on, in my opinion. Lieutenant Holman, you were in the courtroom yesterday during the testimony of Melissa Oberg. Is that correct? Yes, I was. And were you able to hear her testimony and see the evidence presented to her? Yes, I did. I wanted to start off with a point of clarification. There was some information brought up about the results of her findings concerning matching a bullet to a gun, comparing that to a paternity test. Do you remember that line of questioning? Yes, I do. And is that something that you believed? Yes. And is that something that you put out to other people? Yes. And after her explanation yesterday, you have a better understanding that that may not be the case? I do. She talked about an error rate. Yes. You recall that? Yes, she did. And what do you recall the error rate being? I recall her talking about error rates with different tests, and remember her saying the error rate in the paternity test was low. So I compared that to what she was saying about the bullet, and at the time, I did not recall what she was saying the error rate was for the round, but I think it was 2% or zero point 0.2 or something like that. You understand, after her testimony yesterday, that's not what she was saying. Yes, I misinterpreted what she was saying. Was the belief held by others in unified command? Yes. And so there was a lot of people that believed that it was comparable to a paternity test. Yes, we did. There was also statements brought up about Melissa Oberg stating that after she examined the bullet that it could be matched to a Smith& Wesson or a Sig Sauer. You recall that testimony? Yes, I do. And is that something you believed, that after she examined the bullet that the bullet was going to be matched to either a Smith& Wesson or a Sig Sauer? That's what we believed. Did you hear her testimony yesterday? Yes. Okay. And so is that something you're conceding you misrepresented or misunderstood from her as well? Yes. However, you did examine Sig Sauers and Smith& Wesson. Is that correct? Yes, we did. And the gun you found in Rich Allen's house, I don't know why you call him Rich, because he either goes by Rick or Richard, is what brand? What's the brand of the gun it found in Richard Allen's house? A SIG. Okay. I want to start off with, we went over some of your training and experience the last time you testified. Do you recall that? Yes, I do. He was only on the stand for a very brief time. He only testified to like a very narrow um, uh, point of the investigation. Now he's going to talk more about this gun, I'm assuming, or bullet, I should say, and him finding the bullet and whatnot in Richard Allen's house. and the guns. I want to talk about some of your specific training on interviewing a suspect. Can you tell the jury some of the specific training that you have in doing interviews of people? Sure. Basic training, obviously, in the police academy. Just basic interviewing techniques, how to document. And then I've been to Reed Interrogation School and Advanced Read, and that basically talks about how to interview suspects, witnesses, build rapport, what you can and what you can't do. I've been through that training. The Reed training, the Reed interrogation technique is a technique where you are almost guaranteed a confession, whether it's a true confession or a false confession. That's up for grabs because the Reed technique deals with pressuring people, using fear, using tactics to control and manipulate the conversation. And but he says the Reed technique is to interview suspects, and it talks about interviewing suspects and building rapport. Baloney. The Reed technique is to secure that confession, whether it's a real confession or a false confession. They don't care, they just want the confession. And that's what the Reed technique is really good at, getting one way or the other. So that just shows you who we're dealing with already to start out with, right? It's been a while since I've been to that training. I think it was 2006, maybe 7. And then I've also been to Finding Words. That's how to interview essayed children, a different type of interviewing technique. This guy interviews children who have been essayed. That's so scary. I wouldn't want him anywhere near my child asking any kinds of questions. And I've also been to CIT, which is, I forget the abbreviation, but basically it is how to detect someone with a mental illness and how to talk to them and interview them. Okay. And those techniques that you learned through those different training seminars and classes, have you used those while you're interviewing people? Yes, I have. And this is an unfair question, but how many people have you interviewed throughout your career? Hundreds. My best guess. And you talked a little bit about some of you touched base on them a little bit, but what are some of the techniques that you've learned through that training and experience? What are some of the techniques that you've learned that you use during the interview of someone? First, you want to try to build a little bit of rapport with them. Yeah, make them think you guys are friends before you twist and turn everything that comes out of their mouth. First, you want to build a little bit of rapport with them if you can. Talk to them. The other thing is you want to present evidence that you might have. Show them pictures or something to that effect. You can even lie to them. Lie to them about the amount of evidence that you have or over exaggerate the evidence. So he's admitting you can lie. This is one of our problematic, one of the many issues that we have with our criminal justice system, our justice system, is that officers can just lie to you to try to get a confession out of you. Those are some of the techniques that you can use. And then reading their body language is something that I've been trained in a little bit. Okay. Body language reading is not science, and therefore I don't think that is, it's never reliable, and everybody's different, and it's completely junk science. But it's not admissible in court, but he can use it to interview people. Isn't that interesting? Have you used those different techniques in interviews with people you suspect of crimes? Yes, I have. And have you used those techniques often when interviewing people suspected of crimes? Yes. I want to take you back to October 26th of 2022. Do you recall that day? I do. And is that the day that you interviewed Richard Allen? Yes, it is. And that interview, in part, was recorded. Is that correct? Yes. And from that recording, there was a transcript created of that interview. Is that right? Yes. And would you agree with me? Sorry, let me back up. Have you had an opportunity to review that transcript? I have. And you may not know the length, but if I told you the transcript was 80 pages long, do you have any reason to disagree with that? No, I don't. Have you memorized every word within that transcript? What kind of question is that? Of course not. He says no. And so when I ask you questions about the interview, are you going to be able to recite back to me the specific question you asked? No. Are you going to be able to recite back to me the specific answer that Richard Allen gave? No. But you have reviewed that transcript. I have. And you're familiar with the interview? Yes, I am. So I want to talk about that interview. Again, October 26th of 2022. Is that the day you recall? It is. Tell me where that interview took place. The interview took place at the Indiana State Police Post in Lafayette, Indiana, in one of our interview rooms. And at that time of the interview, did you have the information about Melissa Oberg's findings? I did. And so the information, as you understood it, prior to calling Richard Allen in, the information pertaining to the gun found at Richard Allen's house and the bullet at the crime scene, what information did you have? I had the initial report that she made, the certificate of analysis, and it told us that the round found at the scene matched Richard Allen's gun that we found at his house. Now, you're not using the same language as Ms. Oberg used. No. You understand that? I am. Yes, I am not. But you had that information or you knew that information before you called Richard Allen. Yes. And so the interview took place at the Indiana State Police Post. How did you get Mr. Allen to the post? I believe Steve Mullen communicated with him and arranged him to show up, I believe, a couple days before that, and then they had to reschedule, and then he and his wife came there. I don't know how they got there or who drove, but they drove there. What was the reasoning for them coming to the post? We wanted to talk about the giving back some items and also find out an explanation of why that round was at the scene of two murdered girls. At that point, we had also confiscated his car as part of the search warrant of the house. Is that right? Yes, and we planned on giving that car back. So the ruse to get him there to interview him or interrogate him was we're going to give you your car back. Come on in and we'll get to talking a little. We'll just put you in an interview room until we get your car ready for you. And during that time, we're going to ask you questions and pretend like we're pals and buddies. And then it's going to lead into a more heated conversation. And then it becomes an interrogation, which I don't know if you guys have all seen it. It's been released since the trial, the end of the trial. I might just release it as a separate video, perhaps, just so you guys can revisit that interview with Jerry Holman. It's quite telling that Richard Allen holds his ground the whole time, always says he's innocent, never says that he did anything, that he had anything to do with it. He even pushes back on Holman when Holman gets to be aggressive and in his language and stuff. And Holman does get aggressive in that interview. And there's portions of this interview that are missing, by the way, where he just comes back, like it ends, there's a break or something, and then he comes back on the screen and it's just him yelling at Richard Allen and like they're in a heated conversation and you don't get the full what happened before that. So that's an issue too. But anyways, let's move on. All right, so at that point, we had also confiscated his car. He says, yes, we were planning on giving that back. And in fact, you told him that, come to the post. We're prepared to release the vehicle to you. Yes. When he got to the post, what happened? I escorted him back to the interview room and I started the interview. At what point, when he went back to the interview room, was he under arrest? Oh, sorry. At that point, when, sorry, I can't read today. At that point, when he went back to the interview room with you, was he under arrest? No. At that point, was your plan to arrest him? No, it was not. Did you read his Miranda rights? No, I did not. Did you remind him of his Miranda rights? I did remind him of them. Tell me about that. I knew that he had been interviewed a few days before that by Steve Mullen and Tony Liggett. I asked him if he remembered being interviewed and read his rights, and he said he did. When he got to the post, where did you take him? I took him to the interview room. And was the door locked? No. Was he free to leave? Yes. How many people were in the room when you did the interview? Most of the time, just one. There was one point where Detective Vito came in there for a short time. And did you then begin the interview with Richard Allen? I did. Tell me how you began the interview. I believe I just talked to him about it. Something was damaged, like I did the other day when he was there, if he had anything damaged. I think I gave him a copy of the tort claim. That's the process. If you have property damage, you can fill it out. We talked about some of the articles. The lab wanted me to find out if anybody had ever borrowed any of that or for a long period of time. So we talked about that initially. Did you also talk about firearms? We did. Did you talk about your time in the Marines? I did. And why would you do that? Just building rapport. I'm just like him. I'm just one of the good guys, just talking to my pal. Not at all trying to convict him of a crime he didn't commit. He says, just building rapport. I knew he was in the army. We were both in the military. We talked about types of guns that we had in the military, types of guns he had, types of guns I had. Did you talk about firing those guns? Yes. Did you talk about frequency of firing those guns? Yes. Can you tell me about that? I think I made a comment about if I could build an indoor range, I would shoot my SIG every day if I could afford the ammo. And I asked him if he shot his every day or how often, and he said that he hadn't shot it very often. He didn't have that much experience, and it's been a while. You then continued with the interview, is that correct? Yes. What did you do next? At some point, I don't know the exact order, but at some point I showed him the results and confronted him about why his round was at the murder scene. Before that, did you have any discussion with him about loaning out items that he owned? Yes. Will you tell me about that, please? Yes, I asked if anybody ever borrowed his car for a long period of time. I gave him an example of a friend of mine had a fuel pump go out. I let him use my truck. He said that it would be a week or two. It ended up being 4 or 5 months. And he said, no, nobody's ever borrowed his car. I asked him about clothing articles. I gave him an example that I wear my son's coat sometimes. I may keep it for a year and give it back. And he said, no, no one's ever borrowed any of his clothes that he knew of. And I asked him if he'd ever lent his gun out. The example I gave him is my son-in-law collects guns. Sometimes he gets low on finances, so he'll give me one of his guns and I'll give him $500. And then when he pays me back, I give him his gun back. Huh? I don't buy any of these examples that Jerry Holman is giving us. I asked him if he's ever done anything like that, and he said no, he did not think he's ever lent his gun out to anybody. Why did you put those personal examples in there when you were asking him those questions? just to make sure he understands exactly what I was asking. Is it also part of the rapport building? It is. So those were all lies, those examples, and he was only doing that to try to get get Richard Allen to admit to something like that. You asked him about the firearm, if he'd ever loaned it out again, correct? Correct. And what was his response? Do you recall? No. No, you don't recall? Or no was his response. Did you talk to him about his statement about where he was on February 13th of 2017? Briefly. Did you talk to him about his firearm that he had and whether or not he had it on that date? I did. Tell me about that, please. I asked him if he normally carried his firearm, and he said no. He only carried it when he was fishing or mushroom hunting. I asked him if he had it that day, and he said no. So he told you no, he did not have his firearm that day. Correct. And what did you do next? After you talked about those issues or those topics, what did you move on to next? I think that's when I confronted him about the round being there. Tell me how. Tell me about that. I told him that we had a report from the lab saying that the gun that we recovered from the search warrant, sorry, from the search warrant matched a round that was found, I think I may have said 6 inches from one of the girl's foot and in between the other girl. When you told him that, what was his response? He denied it. He didn't know how. He couldn't explain how that round would have got there. Well, if you're innocent, I would think that that would be your response, to deny it and say it's impossible for that to get there, which is exactly what he did. Now, let's talk about his demeanor at the beginning of the interview. What was his demeanor at the beginning of the interview? Calm. I'd say normal. What is normal? You don't know him. What is normal? Did his demeanor change when you confronted him with that information? Yes. I confronted him multiple times about it, and each time he came, he became more agitated. Yeah, because you're not listening to him and you're not accepting what he's saying to you. And the more and more you're asking the question, the more he's frustrated he's becoming. I would be the same way. When you initially confronted him with it, he denied it, correct? Yes, he's always denied it until they started drugging him at the hospital or at the prison. And you carried on with the interview, is that right? I did. At this point, when you confronted him with the information, was he under arrest? No. At that point in your mind, did you say, I'm going to arrest him? No. I call BS. You continued to talk about the findings, is that correct? I did. And at one point, you asked him about a comment that he made to you during the search of his home. Do you recall that? I do. Tell me again the comment he made during the search of his home. I believe it was, it doesn't matter, it's over. Wait a minute. If they say that the bullet matches his gun, why wouldn't you have planned to arrest him if that's your evidence, right? So this evidence that you have, supposedly that you have, and is so conclusive, right? You just arrest him for that? You don't need to sit him down and ask him, how did that get there? Did you ever loan your gun out? You don't need to ask all these questions because you could just arrest him on the spot because you have him dead to rights. That's his bullet and gun, right? The bullet cycled through his gun. Well, no, because it's not that easy, and the science is really junk science. So that's why he has to sit him down and ask him all these questions and try to get him, ask him the same question over and over again to try to get a different answer out of Richard Allen to say, yeah, I did it. When in reality, they don't have diddly squat against the guy. And this was an exercise to get more information out of Richard Allen. And if you did have him dead to rights, this is the bullet, and it came from his gun, then you don't need, or you would have absolutely had intentions of arresting him that day. Am I wrong? Like, he's not, there's no consistency in Jerry Holman's testimony, I would say. All right, let's continue. Tell me again that comment that he made during the search of his home. I believe it was over. It doesn't matter, it's over. But give us the context. You can't just say that and then not give us context about that. You confronted him about the comment during this October 26th, 2022 interview. Is that correct? I did. I told him I was concerned about that comment and asked him what he meant by it. What was his response? He said the damage was done, I believe. He said that interviewed his neighbors, his coworkers, and everybody believed that he did it, and that we've already basically, in my words, ruined his life. Well, yeah, an innocent man can feel that way if he feels like he's being unfairly, wrongfully accused of a crime. And everybody in his world now thinks he did it because of you. Yeah, it's okay for him to feel that way. It's totally an appropriate reaction. At that point, had we announced to the public or anybody that an arrest had been made? Not to my knowledge, no. After you confront him with the information from Melissa Oberg, what do you do next? At some point, I don't know exactly the order. At some point, I think I gave him a water early, and I asked him if he wanted to take a smoke break. I knew he smoked and asked him if he needed to use the restroom, so I gave him a break. Did you continue to confront him with evidence? Yes. And at some point, did you talk to him about the video from Libby German's phone? I did. Did you talk to him about the voice on the video? Yes. And what did he tell you? Or what did you tell him? Sorry, what did you tell him? I told him that we had witnesses that saw him out there. I also told him we had experts that said that's him on the video and that's his voice. I'm sorry, is there going to be a voice expert that's going to come in and testify to that? Because I don't think you have one. And that's just ridiculous. But okay. And that's for the jury to decide. At that point, did you have experts telling you that? No, we did not. So you lied to him. I did. Had you done that in other interviews with suspects that are suspects in crimes? Yes, I have. Is that a technique that you've learned from your training and experience? Yes, it's an approved technique that we use to elicit responses from the person that we're talking to. You continue to discuss the findings, is that correct? Yes. And throughout this investigation, or throughout this interview or interrogation even, did Mr. Allen give you any explanation of how this bullet got to the crime scene? No. What did he tell you? He just kept telling me there's no way that's his bullet. No way that that bullet came from his gun. He just continued to deny. That's what I would do if I was innocent. I'm not seeing the problem here. Did you ask him whether or not he committed these offenses? I did. What was his response? No. And he continued that response throughout the interrogation. Is that correct? Yes. And you had an opportunity to review the transcript? I did. How many times did he deny participating in the murder of Abby Williams and Libby German? I would say between 20, 25. That's a guess. I didn't count. In a 45-minute interview, I think, maybe an hour, I don't know how long it was, he denies it 20 to 25 times. So, what does that tell you? He also denied having his gun that day on the trail. Is that correct? Yes. Each time you confronted him with the information from the lab about his bullet being at the scene, did he have any explanation? Never. No. Did you ask him if he'd ever been to that area where the bodies were? I did. Did you ask him if he'd ever been mushroom hunting or hunting out there? Yes. What was his response? He said, no. At some point, then, during that interview, did he inform you that in his past he had had some mental health struggles? He did. What did he say? I believe he said that he had been suffering from depression and maybe anxiety. After he informed you of those things, did you continue to deny any involvement in this? Did he continue to deny his involvement? He did. Did he continue to deny the findings from the lab that his bullet was found at the crime scene? Yes. You have training to pick up. You talked about some training that you have. I think the CIT training, that deals with people you're interviewing that may be suffering from mental health effects. Is that correct? Yes. From that training and experience, when Richard Allen informed you that he had depression, anxiety, and those kinds of things, did you pick up on any of those things that you'd learned from your training and experience? No, I just remembered it's critical incident training, and no, I did not observe any obvious signs of mental health issues. What are obvious signs of depression and anxiety that you struggle with on and off throughout your whole life? What are the obvious signs? I mean, I'm sure he was stressed out being there, but he, for the most part, he held his calm and like discussed calmly with Jerry Holman, even when Jerry Holman was getting heated. But signs of depression and anxiety aren't really going to be visibly obvious on someone. So you can stick your CIT training where the sun don't shine, Jerry Holman. As the interview continued, did his demeanor change? Yes. Tell me about that. After I asked him 25 times about the crime, he started becoming agitated with me. Did you ask him if he had ever fired his .40 caliber weapon on the property around the bridge? I did. Tell me about that. Just asked him if he ever had the gun out there, ever target shoot the weapon out there in that area, and he said no. After he told you about his mental health issues that he had, you continued on with the interview, is that correct? I did. At some point, well, let me back up. Let me rephrase the question. At some point, did he make a statement about him not confessing to something? Objection, leading. I'll restate the question. Sustained. He continued to deny that he was involved in that. Is that correct? Yes. What else did he say about denying being involved in the crime? He said multiple times, I'm not going to tell you something I didn't do. And he made the comment one time that I don't care what you do to me, I'm never going to tell you that I did something that I didn't do. Both something someone who is innocent would say. Both things would be something I would say if I was innocent. Like, I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. That's basically what he's saying. Like, I'm not going to, you could do whatever you want to me. I'm not going to admit to something that I didn't do. You continued to talk to him after that, is that correct? Yes. Did he deny that he'd ever contacted Abby Williams and Libby German? He did. Did he deny knowing the two girls? Yes. There's never been any proof that he knew them or had any contact with them. As the interview goes on, did his demeanor continue to change? Yes, like I said, he just became more agitated with me. Maybe because you're asking him the same questions over and over again and accusing him of a horrific crime that he had nothing to do with. At some point, did the conversation between the two of you get heated? Yes. Can you tell me about that? I think he indicated that he was pissed off and said he didn't effing do it, and then I believe I raised my voice and cursed back at him several times. That's when we see on camera him being verbally Aggressive. Why did you raise your voice and cuss back at him? Usually, I match their demeanor and try to speak their language, so the whole beginning of the interview, neither one of us was cursing at each other. But once he started cursing, I thought that's a way that you speak their language. You talk to them in their language to try to get them to understand that you're being serious as well by swearing at him. Did you then go back to talk with him about if his gun had ever been loaned out to anybody? I did. I think I revisited that a couple of times. And did he give you a different answer when you asked those questions? No, he did not. Did he ever give you a different answer or a different explanation of how his bullet got to the crime scene? Can you rephrase that? I'm sorry. Did he ever give you an explanation during that interview of how a bullet that was cycled through his gun got to the crime scene? No. Mr. Baldwin says, objection to the bullet cycling through his gun and move to strike that. That's an opinion for the jury. Mr. McLeland says, that was the opinion of the expert judge that we heard yesterday. Those were the words that she used. Court says, overruled. How she was able, sorry. Court says, overruled. Judge, may I approach? The court says, sure. The witness says, Judge, may I get my water? The court says, yes. So now we have a quick sidebar. Mr. Baldwin says, so basically, what you've just done is said to the jury, in my opinion, respectfully, that that round cycled through Rick's gun, that that bullet cycled through Rick's gun. That's just what happened. I'm just being straight with you, Judge. The court says, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Mr. Baldwin says, it's an opinion to say. The court says, that was his question. You objected. Mr. Baldwin says, yeah. And then you said, and then his response was, that was what the expert said. And then you said, overruled. Court says, overruled. Mr. Baldwin says, which now tells the jury, and it's telling the jury that the gun, the bullet, was cycled through the gun, as the judge has accepted that. The court says, no, I overruled I overruled your objection, and that is what the expert said. That's for the jury to determine whether they believe that. Mr. Baldwin says, well, he didn't couch it in terms of the expert, he couched it in terms of that bullet was cycled through the gun. Court says, that is correct. And then, when you objected, I asked for his explanation, and his explanation was recounting the witness's testimony, and it's up to the jurors as to the weight that they give that. Mr. Baldwin says, well, that's what I said, and then you overruled it, making it sound like what I said was not, that he was correct and I was not correct. I mean, I think it's solved by saying to the jury, you are the trier of fact if you believe the expert or not. I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm explaining it very well, but I think it just comes off as when I objected to that, he should have rephrased and said, that's yes, and I'm saying it as the expert said. The court says, then perhaps you should rephrase that question. Mr. McLeland says, that's fine, Judge, I can do that. Mr. Baldwin says, thank you, I appreciate that. Sidebar conference concluded. That's the appropriate call, in my opinion. Lieutenant Holman, I'm going to rephrase the question. Again, you were here yesterday during the testimony of Melissa Oberg. Yes. And you heard her testimony that her belief was the round found at the scene was cycled through the firearm found at Richard Allen's house. Yes. And that's what you believed during the interview of Richard Allen. Is that correct? Yes, I did. And you confronted him with that information that was transmitted to you from the expert. Is that correct? Yes, I had the certificate of analysis with me. And so during the interview with Richard Allen, were you of the same belief as the expert? Yes. Again, so that just confirms Jerry Holman is of the belief that this bullet, this round that was found at the scene, was actually cycled through Richard Allen's gun. So then why again would he not have any intention of arresting him that day? That makes no sense. Am I totally out of left field here? Because I feel like I'm in crazy town. That your belief was that the round found at the scene had cycled through Richard Allen's gun. Without a doubt, That's what I believe. That was your belief? That was my belief. You used that belief to confront Richard Allen with those findings during his interview. Is that correct? I did. And so, as you're interviewing Richard Allen, you're telling him your belief, correct? Yes, yes. That the cartridge was cycled through his firearm. Yes. And you confronted him with that several times throughout the interview? I did. And did he ever give you an explanation for that? No. Well, he did give you an answer for it, though, right? What was his answer when you confronted him with that information? I don't remember exact words, but something to the effect, there's no way that that round cycled through my gun or was in my gun, and I don't know how that round got there. Something like that. You followed that up with a question, though, is that correct? I don't remember, but I'd have to. Did you ask him how his firearm or how his bullet got to the crime scene? Yes. And what was his explanation? He didn't have one. He didn't know. Did you ask him if he was on the trail on February 13th of 2017? I did. What was his response? He was. He said he already told me or told us that he was out there. Did you ask him if he was on the Monon High Bridge on February 13th of 2017? I believe I did. And what was his response? I think it was similar to the same one. I already told you that I was out there. What about what he was wearing on February 13th, 2017? Same response. He said, I've already told you what I was wearing out there when I was out there. At some point in the interview, you said you allowed him to take a break. Is that correct? I did. And after the break, did you continue the interview? Yes. And was there anything else during the part of the interview when he came back from the break that stuck out to you? A few things. Tell me about those. At one point, he told Kathy that all you have to do is ask for a lawyer and they have to let you go. Don't worry about me. All that says to me is that he was more worried and concerned about his wife and her emotional wellness at that moment than his own. That's what that tells me. It doesn't tell me he's guilty of anything. What does that have to do? Like the things that they're trying to insinuate have some kind of nefarious meaning are ridiculous. Well, let's back up a bit. At some point in the interview, let me ask you this, who's Kathy? Kathy is Mrs. Allen, Richard's wife. And you said in the beginning that in the interviews, it is that you said in the beginning that in the interview is just you and Richard Allen. Yes. Okay, tell me how Kathy comes into play. I can't remember exactly when, but we allowed her to come in and talk to Richard. And were you in the room during the two of them talking? No, I was observing. And did Richard Allen have a conversation with Kathy? Yes, I should rephrase that. I was observing most of it. I came back in at some point and we were all three in there. During that time that all three of you were in there, did you observe the conversation between Kathy and Richard Allen? I did. When you were out of the room, did you observe the conversation between Kathy and Richard Allen? Yes. And you stated that one thing that you said was interesting. You were starting down that road. And what was that comment? I can't remember exactly how he made it, but he told Kathy that ask for a lawyer, we'd have to let her go. Don't worry about me, or something to that effect. So, did you then continue to question Richard Allen? I did. Did you continue to talk to him about his firearm? I did. These questions that he keeps repeating are a waste of time. Did you ever ask him questions concerning how he carries his firearm? Yes, I asked him if he carried it, how he carried it, and he said that he had a side holster that went on his belt. What about ammunition? When he carried his firearm, did he talk about that at all? Yes, I asked him if, when he carried it, did he carry one in the chamber or just the magazine in there? And he told me that he thought he normally would carry the gun with one in the chamber. At this point in the interview, was Richard Allen under arrest? No. Again, no. You supposedly have connected him to the crime scene and you're not going to arrest him? Okay. At this point in the interview, you had decided that you were going to arrest him? No. At any point during the interview, did you give any indication that he knew, did he give any indication that he knew Abby or Libby? No. Did he give you any indication that he murdered the two of them? No, he did not. Did he give you any indication that he carried his firearm when he was on the trail on February 13th of 2022? No. Did he give you any indication of how his round or a round was found between the bodies of the two girls? No. During the conversation you had with him, you testified, you were able to observe his demeanor? I did. And through your training and experience, are you able to identify when a suspect is being deceptive with you? Sometimes. What kind of things do you look for? There's many, and I'm no expert at it, but touching their face. Mr. Baldwin says, I'll object to the rest of his answer. Mr. McLeland says, I can build a foundation, Judge. Sustained. You have training and experience with interviewing people who have been suspect of crimes. Is that correct? Yes, I have. And then in some of those instances, those suspects have lied to you. Is that correct? Yes, they have. Now, you testified to your training. Which part of this training has taught you to pick up on cues from a suspect to show when they're showing deceit? I believe it was the read interrogation, but I'm not 100% sure. So, the line of training that basically coerces a confession no matter what. And how do you use the techniques in the read training that helped you, or do you use techniques from that training that helped you pick up on cues on when someone is being untruthful? Yes, I have. Have you done this in the past? Yes, I have. And did you do this in this interview? I did. Did you pick up on any cues that Richard Allen was being untruthful? Mr. Baldwin says, preliminary question. The judge says, yes. Mr. Baldwin says, please tell us these pieces of information you learned at your read technique seminars or training that allow you to testify as you're about to testify. I'm not sure if it was the read, but at some point I've had training in watching body language, touching the face, looking away, looking down, things like that. I don't know all of them, but those are some of the cues. Okay, so touching of the face, who as it that who was it that told you that? Which trainer told you about this touching of the face business, and what is it that they said about the touching of the face, how and why it indicates that somebody might be deceptive? I don't recall who told me, but I just know that if somebody continues to rub their face or make any hand movements, that's a sign of deception. Well, I'm screwed because I talk with my hands all the time. So, yikes. This is so ridiculous. Hand movements, really? Mr. Baldwin says, so this is a sign of deception is what you've been trained? It could be. He demonstrates. He probably just moved his hand. Okay. What was one of the other ones? Not looking away. Not making eye contact. Mr. Baldwin says, no, no eye contact. And who was the instructor that talked about that, and what were their credentials to come up with that? I don't recall, sir. What was another one? Looking down. I guess that would be looking down. Who was the instructor on that, and what was their credentials? I don't know. I'll object to this line of questioning. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, I think he's laid a foundation from his training and experience. He says that he doesn't know who came up with it or where it came from. He can at least testify to his observations during the interview that he's made. I think it goes more to weight. Defense can argue that it shouldn't be given any weight, but I think he can at least testify to his observations during the interview, and of course, she overrules that. Lieutenant Holman, were there signs that you saw during the interview of deception of Richard Allen? This should never come in. He says a few, nothing obvious, no. What were those? Just very minor, being very denial and touching the face, looking down, not making eye contact at sometimes. Really? This just sounds like a normal conversation to me. And the denial comes from, him not doing it. So there's that. Now, very subtle. Very subtle. Now, you're not suggesting on the stand today that everybody that denies is being deceptive, are you? No. You're not suggesting that everybody that touches their face is being deceptive, are you? No. But these things stuck out to you during this interview specifically with Richard Allen. Those and some of the comments he made. Okay. Do you remember any of the comments he made specifically? I remember one comment where I told him that I didn't think that his wife and I thought that he was a bad person, and he looked at me and he said, "What kind of a good person kills two people?" Or two girls, sorry. What kind of good person would kill two girls? Which is a valid question, whether he's guilty or not. And so that comment gave you some concern, a little bit. At some point during the interview, do you escort his wife, Kathy Allen, back out of the interview? I do. Do you go back in and talk to Richard Allen some more? Briefly. At that point, was Mr. Allen under arrest? No. At that point, was he still free to leave? Yes. Throughout this entire interview, up until now, is he free to leave? Yes, he is. Did he ever leave? When they say you're free to leave, they block you from leaving the room. They do this on purpose. They physically put you in a corner and block you from being able to leave. So people don't feel like they can just get up and go. They feel trapped in there. And that's another part of that read technique. They also intrude on your personal space and they get in your personal space and they get real close to you and ask you questions, make you feel really uncomfortable. So it is not people won't act normally in that situation, even innocent or not or guilty, when you've got someone in your personal space constantly bombarding you with the same question over and over again, telling you lies. It's not an appropriate way to get people convicted here. So where was I? At that point, he's free to leave. Did he ever leave? Only when he went out to on a smoke break and he came back. Did he ever end the interview? He never ended the interview. He did say, "I'm done," a couple of times, but continued to talk. So if he said, "I'm done," then why did you guys keep asking him questions to get him to continue to talk? Because it should have been done at that point. You advised him of his, or you asked him if he knew his Miranda rights. I did. And what was his response? He said he understood. So we come to the end of the interview where it's him and you in the room, correct? Then what happens? Well, I believe that's where I got a little more heated and I told him that I thought he did it. And at some point he said, "Take all your evidence and just arrest me." And at that point, did you leave the room? I did. Did you meet with other investigators? Yes. And what was the decision made at that point? Our decision was to detain him for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. Why did you do that? Why? Let me back up. Yeah, why did you do that? We felt that we had enough evidence to establish probable cause to make an arrest. Mr. McLellan says, "I don't have any other questions, Judge. Thank you." Mr. Baldwin, says the court. Mr. Baldwin says, "Thank you." and cross-examination begins. We're not going to be able to get through all of it, but we're going to get it started, and then they're going to go for a break, and then that's where we're going to end for today. So just a little bit longer here. Mr. Baldwin is doing the questions of Jerry Holman, and he says, "I saw you looking down quite a bit during your testimony, looking down like that," and he demonstrates. "Is that one of the signs of deception you were talking about earlier?" Coming in hot with the first question already. He says that could be a sign of deception. Yes. You know what? I think it is because I know Jerry Holman to be a lying liar who lies. So it probably was. The nice, calm guy on the stand right here is not the same guy Richard Allen experienced, is it? Yes. Now you testify that you reminded Richard of his Miranda rights? I did. And that you also told him he was free to leave? I did. And that's important because if you didn't do those things, somebody might scrutinize the constitutionality of that interrogation. Would you agree? I would. I would agree with that. But surprisingly, you tell Richard Allen that he was free to leave and you reminding him of his Miranda rights is missing on the video, isn't it? At the beginning, we had technical difficulties with the audio video recording equipment. And so what happened was this is what you say. There was technical difficulty. That's what you claim. That's what happened. And then when you learned that, then you came outside. That is what you say. You went outside. Dave Vito came in and said, "Hey, it's not working," or something, correct? Right. And then you went outside, correct? Yes. And then you got it working. Somebody got it working. And then you sort of, when you were outside, it started working and it was recording, correct? It appeared to be, but I'm not sure if it was yet or not. Well, that's not what you told me. To me, it looked like it was. Well, you said to me in a deposition that you saw with your own eyes 3 dots. Mr. McLeland says, "Judge, may we approach, please?" The court says, "Yeah." Sidebar here, Mr. McLeland says, "I don't," and we've got an inaudible. "I don't something, but we all see what he did last time. He wants to read the transcript into the record. That's not how you impeach a witness with a transcript. That violates the rule of procedure. Ask him a question. If he doesn't remember, you can show him his transcript to refresh his recollection." Mr. Baldwin says, "That's fair." Court says, "Okay." Mr. Baldwin says, "Apologize." "I'll do that." Court says, "Okay." "Do you remember taking a deposition back in May of this year with me?" The witness says, I think I did 3 altogether. I can't remember." "I think you did 2, but one was August 10th of 2023, right?" "Yes." "And the other was May the 3rd of 2024? "I'll take your word for it." "Okay. And would it help refresh your memory as to whether or not you knew that that was recording when you walked in, back into the interrogation room?" "No, I told you I thought it was recording. Yes." "Yeah, you saw it recording with your own eyes. You saw the 3 dots. That shows it's recording, correct?" "Yes." "And the problem with your story, and so therefore we should see you walking into the interview room because it's already recording and sitting down with Richard Allen, correct?" There's a delay in the recording. So that's why we don't see him walk into the room and start the recording? Oh, there's a delay in the recording? Yes. So we don't get to see you walking in. Even though it is recording, we don't get to see you walking in and sitting down, do we? How would a delay prevent that? Wouldn't it just mean that you would see him later? The delay doesn't make sense. He says it starts after. The delay makes it start after I get in there. So it's recording, but then there's a delay somehow as you walk in, as you see it recording, then there's a delay. That's your explanation? That's what I believe, yes. Okay. So we don't see you. Strike that. The recording does not show, therefore, you telling him about his Miranda rights, reminding him of those, correct? That's correct. And that he was free to leave? That's correct. This is one of many missing videos in this case, would you agree? I don't know. You don't know about? There's some missing videos, yes. And some missing videos from February of 2017. We had a lot of technical difficulty with audio and video. Interesting. From March or April the 28th to June the 2nd, a bunch of videos gone. Mr. McClellan says, Judge, I'm going to object. This is outside the scope of direct. Sustained. So we just have to take your word for it then that you read him, that you told him about his Miranda rights and told him he was free to leave. My word and the witnesses that were observing that day. And you were here, I think it was 2 days ago when Steve Mullen testified, were you not? I was. And he talked about the first interview of October the 13th. He did. And then you interviewed, your interview was October the 26th, right? Yes. Okay. And you heard him also say that there was a similar demeanor change in Richard Allen at the end of his interrogation. Yes, I observed that interrogation as well, and I don't recall it. Judge, at this time I would move to admit both the October 13th and the October 26th interrogations and ask them to be played for the jury. The state has put into play Mr. Allen's demeanor, and I think that can only be seen and understood and interpreted by the viewer of the video. Court says perhaps you should mark those then. Mr. McClellan says, Judge, do you want to have a sidebar before he does that? Says Mr. McClellan. The court says, sure. McClellan says, there may be some issues we need to speak about, Judge. Oh, says the court. Sidebar conference conducted. Mr. McClellan says, do you want to put those in? Says, yeah. McClellan says, do you want to put the whole interview in? Yeah. There was just one thing on the second one about the polygraph that I don't think. Mr. McClellan says, no, there's several spots. Baldwin says, okay, well, play the first one and then we will edit out. Scrub that as well? That'd be a while. Scrubbed it for mention of polygraphs, says McClellan. I mean, I don't care if you want to put them in there. We do not something. But I think it's bad for your client. Probably said we do not object. Um, the court says he was offered a polygraph. Mr. Rosie says, well, when we talked about this, and I emailed you about this the other day. I was like, I don't think that they should hear that. McClellan says, well, I wasn't going to put them in for that reason. Mr. Baldwin says, well, it can be redacted. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, it can. Baldwin says, yeah. McClellan says, okay. Baldwin says, it's easy to do when McClellan says, okay, well, I think court says you can't do it on the fly. Ms. Diener says, Judge, I think we should also review it for a reference to a third party. And Mr. McClellan says, that's true, there may be other. Ms. Diener says, and we've been successful in keeping that out. Mr. McClellan says, issues in there. Diener says, and there might be a reference to that. Mr. Baldwin says, no, there is Keegan. Mr. McClellan says, yeah, there's a Keegan Klein reference. Court says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, so there's other references in there, so I don't know that I don't necessarily have an objection, but I'm not comfortable putting it in unedited. Court says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, well, we've got time in our case in chief too. Mr. Baldwin says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, I think this is more of a legal argument right now. Court says, right. Mr. Rosie says, and I understand he asked to admit it. Yeah, says the court. But I mean, I think it's more of a legal argument that would be on the table that we can clean up. Mr. McClellan says, why don't I edit them? Mr. Baldwin says, okay. Mr. McClellan says, and give them to you guys. Mr. Baldwin says, all right. Mr. McClellan says, and we'll play them next week. Mr. Baldwin says, all right. And I think, to be fair to you, I don't want the jury to have the impression that you are objecting right now, I don't think that would be right. So Mr. McClellan says, so I think you should withdraw your motion to admit them at this point because you're not moving to admit those. You're going to move to admit a redacted version. Baldwin says, yeah. Mr. Rosie says, why don't we just tell the jury we're going to play them for them at a later time? There's a stipulation and we'll redact them. That way they won't have any impression. Mr. McClellan says, the court says that's even better. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, about who's denying it, who's not. Court says, I'll show that you're something inedible or inaudible and we'll play them at a later time. Mr. Baldwin says, okay. McClellan says, well, what can you make clear to the jury? And should we, I guess, is the question that there would redacted. The court says, well, I think at some point there's going to have to be some explanation because it's going to show some jumps on the screen and times and stuff. Mr. McClellan says, well, what we're going to do, we had talked about this morning, which is why I didn't move to admit it's not ready, but we're going to avoid the jump with a black spot. So it's going to jump, but it's not going to cut right to it's going to be butted out. There's going to be like a 3 or 4 second black spot and then cut to the next part. Court says, oh, okay. I'll just tell them that the parties have agreed that there's some materials that aren't necessarily, Mr. Rosie says, pertinent that talk about something else. I can say that. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, I'm comfortable with all that. Mrs. Diener says, and I think if they know that we're taking our time to review it and you say that we all agree to that, we're all good with that. Mr. Bowman says, so you want me to say that? You would say the stipulation, right? Court says, well, what you've all agreed that we're going to produce it today, that the parties have agreed that the videos will be played sometime next week after removing well, I don't want to say that, just they're going to be seeing them sometime. Mr. Baldwin says, okay. Mr. Rosie says, yeah, I think that's fine. Mr. McClellan says, we're working on. Mr. Baldwin says, you can say that or you want me to say it. Court says, I'll say it. Mr. McClellan says, okay. Court says, I will say it. Mr. McClellan says, my plan is to get them done, give them to you to review, and then we'll play them. Rosie says, okay, good. Ms. Diener says, fair. Sidebar conference concluded. The court says, so, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to show the videos to you sometime next week at an appropriate time. And because of that, Judge, says Mr. Baldwin, it's going to take me a second. I apologize because I can run through a lot of these questions. The court says, sure, that's fine. Mr. Baldwin says, and I apologize for that. The court says, I don't want to rush you. Do you want me to take a break to be able to get to the place that you would like to get to? Mr. McClellan says, Judge, that would be fine with the state. I'm going to have some additional conversation. Some other concerns came up that I think we need to talk about before we get too far into the court says, okay. Well, then why don't we do that? That way you're not pushed to shuffle through something that you're kind of under pressure. So we're going to take a quick break, ladies and gentlemen. While you're outside of the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence, but please only do that if all 15 of you are present in the jury room at the same time. And please don't deliberate. Gentlemen, all rise, says the bailiff. And that is where we will conclude for today. The jury leaves the courtroom and they're going to take a break, and then we'll be back on the record then. Oh, wait, here. The court says you may be seated. Okay, can Lieutenant Holman step down from the stand? Mr. McClellan says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, so why don't you go ahead and step down? I'll give you like 15 minutes. I know I keep saying 15 and I always becomes 20 because 16, 15 people. Yeah. So why don't we take 15 minutes and then I'll give you, Mr. Baldwin, a better opportunity to sort through your notes then. McClellan says, thank you, Judge. The court says, all right, Jody, you can go off the record. And that is where I'm going to leave you. So they are now off the record. We'll come back on the record in the next episode. Continuing, we will finish Lieutenant Jerry Holman's testimony in the next episode. So make sure you are subscribed. Please hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Take care. Bye now.